This installment of MENA Dialogues features a conversation with two of Morocco's most prominent intellectual figures, the political scientist Abdelhay Moudden and the playwright, novelist, and editor Driss Ksikes. The host is MENA director Brian Edwards. Abdelhay Moudden is professor of political science at Mohammed V University in Rabat, and the founder and academic director of the Center for Cross-Cultural Learning in Morocco. He has been a member of Morocco's National Human Rights Council and of the country's Equity and Reconciliation Commission. Driss Ksikes has been called one of the most innovative writers in Morocco today and was named one of the 6 best African playwrights by the National Studio Theatre in London. He's the author of numerous plays, novels, and essays, and the editor-in-chief of the journal Economia. He was a visiting writer-in-residence at Northwestern for the spring quarter of 2017. Brian Edwards is Crown Professor in Middle East Studies and Director of the MENA program at Northwestern University. He is the author of Morocco Bound, Disorienting America's Maghreb from Casablanca to the Marrakesh Express, and After the American Century, The Ends of U.S. Culture in the Middle East. This conversation took place on May 15th, 2017 at Northwestern University.
Abdelhay Moudden, Driss Ksikes, thank you for joining us for MENA Dialogues. We had a wonderful conversation yesterday on MENA Monday, and we're leading up to a symposium on Thursday called Moroccan Exceptionalism, at which both of you will speak along with other scholars. So we wanted to talk through in this interview the idea of exceptionalism with respect to Morocco, if it's a worthy idea, if it's something worth pursuing, or how it's provocative, and also to give us a report on how political and social conditions in Morocco today, more than 5 years after the so-called Arab uprising, 6 years now. So Abdelhay, first of all, I would like to start with you. If this term Moroccan exceptionalism in English, which can refer to a couple of words in Arabic that are in use, istithna and khususiyya, if you could give us a sense of whether you think it's a productive term or how it resonates for you in thinking about what's particular about the Moroccan case.
Well, as an analytical term in social science, it is not actually helpful because it sets a certain country or a certain situation outside of the norms. So in that case, it will be a situation that doesn't fit a generalization, a theory, or a paradigm. From that perspective, it is not that helpful. However, as a question, it is helpful in trying to locate what are some of the characteristics in a particular country like Morocco that distinguishes it from other experiences and from other historical trends that have occurred elsewhere. And from that perspective, I found that the question of exceptionalism opens us to compare Moroccan exceptionalism to so many other cases of exceptionalism that we find around the world, including French exceptionalism, the American exceptionalism, and others.
No, as you said yesterday, for social scientists and for scholarship in general, everything is exceptional in a sense. There's a particularity, which is what khususiyya gets at in Arabic. And yet, there seems to be certain ways in which talking about or thinking about Morocco within the multiple regions that it pertains to, the Arab world, Muslim country world, Africa, Mediterranean, that there seems something particular. When Moroccans use this term, istithna, to refer to Morocco, what do they mean?
Well, there is an entire local or indigenous discourse about exceptionalism, which some of it is related to or voiced by politicians. The state or the officials would like to speak about Moroccan exceptionalism that is different from where Morocco is stable, where Morocco is stable because it is legitimate, where the country has a long history of continuity and longevity, and therefore it is another indication of its legitimacy. Where Morocco, although it was never a part of the domination of big empires such as the Ottoman Empire, or even when it was colonized, it was one of the shortest moments of colonial experiences. So all this is celebrated within a discourse of nationalism, that Morocco is unique, which we find in almost every country celebrates its uniqueness. There is another interesting significance in the indigenous discourse about Moroccan exceptionalism, which sets itself against the Orientalist discourse about the Muslim exception, where Morocco is a part, and the Muslim exception, or sometimes it is also the Arab exception. It is a culture, it is a civilization, or it is a group of countries that don't improve, that don't change, that are stagnant, or that were never a nation state. And the emergence of the Moroccan social science and humanities and history was a reaction against this Orientalist discourse, where the Moroccan intellectuals or academics have been emphasizing that Morocco has existed for a long period of time as a nation, and therefore it was not the creation of the colonialism.
So if there was an Orientalist discourse in which Muslim exceptionalism put the quote-unquote Muslim world outside of the norms of the West, as you put it, Morocco could be an exception to the exception, in the sense that it was different from other parts of the Arab and Muslim majority.
Yeah, here is where some of the Orientalist discourse about exceptionalism, because this is also another version of Orientalist discourse, where Morocco is not a part of the Muslim, is an exception to the Muslim exception, yet it is not a normal situation. It is not Western. Someone said like it is white, but not quite. However, in the Moroccan critique of the Orientalist and exceptionalism and emphasis on the Moroccan exception, it is that Morocco is close to the model of a nation state that existed in the West, and therefore it is closer to the norm of a nation state that has existed in Europe, and likewise it existed in Morocco.
Driss Ksikes, the continuities that Abdelhay refers to, the fact that Morocco's relationship to the Middle East uprisings and Arab uprisings was a bit different, drew the attention of many commentators in the US. People would ask or notice that Morocco did not seem to go through its own major period of tumult around 2011. What's your sense of how activism or this continuity function within the Moroccan contemporary scene?
Well, first, just to talk about this question of exceptionalism from Moroccan point of view, because it's a discourse produced by the elite within Morocco for a long time. It is produced first to say, well, we are the West of Islam, we're not the East of Islam, so that's that, and that we are apart. That's one thing. Second thing, that we are historically an empire linked to sub-Saharan Africa. So that's another point that has been used by jurists and political scientists, and in order to explain the legitimacy of power. A lot of discourses have been produced by the elite on exceptional. Also the question of security, stability, all these questions. Now, when there is eruption of mass protests or manifestation, there, in a certain sense, they break the question of exceptionalism, because you seem alike other countries. I mean, what happened in 2011 was certainly a continuity of Tunisian and Egyptian upheavals. Now, it's the tactics, the strategies of how to absorb people's anger that is very specific and very exceptional then, which is the tactics of either corruption, repression, more saloon discussions on reform rather than discussions on the streets, on the public sphere. So the whole question of how Morocco has the Moroccan officials and Moroccan elites have managed to absorb this is very interesting to look at. One European very prominent MP came once to Morocco and he was asked, how come you're not criticizing Morocco as you're doing with other countries in the region? He said, you know, Morocco is on fire, but it's not really boiling as others are. So in a certain sense, Morocco is looked at as exceptional by comparison also. That's also another point of view of how after 2011 it has been looked upon as a country that should be taken apart also from all this. So there are strategies of the power, the officials, strategies of funders from Europe, and strategies of political actors within Morocco that are very consensual because they're not, they don't take part into a democratic contest for power. They are rather seeking to be closer to the palace decision making, which makes them sometimes closer to the circles of decision and taking distance with representation. So all these elements have to be taken into consideration.
Now, Driss, as a magazine editor, as a former magazine editor and current new magazine editor, and an observer of the Moroccan social scene, the first decade of the 21st century was one in which many debates were taking place, social debates, political debates within Morocco. 2011 seems to be a turning point. How would you compare the first decade and the second decade of this century in Morocco? Are those conversations that were so vibrant in the first decade of the century still happening? Did the political situation change dramatically with the Arab uprisings and so-called Arab Spring?
No, I would say that Arab uprisings this was maybe, we had 1 year of a situation between brackets that seemed to be changing, and then we came back to the initial situation. The initial situation started changing starting from 2003. Actually, in order to understand the situation in Morocco, you have to go back to the mid-90s. At the end of the reign of Hassan II, then there was a sense that we should open up more for a more liberal, maybe liberal political scene in Morocco, and more freedom of expression, etc. But this was useful for some time on transition and the new reign, and also new elite coming and seeking for more freedom. But then the power at stake, the balance of powers at stake didn't allow for this freedom to be maintained, and there was return of limits, not only from above, but also from the actors themselves, accepting more self-censorship. One would think that with the advent of internet, news online, that there will be much more liberty. Actually, the economics of media in Morocco don't allow for more liberty, because we don't have strong corporates of news. We don't have enough public debates in the public sphere. We don't have enough places of freedom of expression. So the margins of liberty that some people are taking are all the time risky, because the political economy of the media is very constraining.
Now, you have a new article in the Journal of North African Studies on Moroccan media, and you're teaching here a course on North African literature in the age of social media. How important do you think the advent of digital technologies, new social media, is to addressing these kinds of censorship or self-censorship, and the ways in which the marketplace limits expression within Morocco?
Well, you know, the fact that we have today something like 8 million Facebookers in Morocco, and that the digital media are totaling something like 3.5 million visitors, means that actually in digital world we're competing the broadcasts, the national broadcasts. That's a new element. The whole thing is that the production of what is there in digital media is more of miscellaneous news, very few investigation, very few huge reporting. There is a lot of voicing, of people, a lot of expression, a lot of testimonies, a lot of different facts coming from society. Maybe we're getting more aware of the diversity of expression within society, but we don't have, unfortunately, enough access to major information and major data, because there is at the same time limited access to information. So even if we have this huge amount of users and a lot of expression, this is creating more tension on social taboos, maybe on some economic points, a lot of more pressure. Sometimes there are even some reforms that could be triggered by the voice of people on the digital world. But all this is still very feeble and very weak, because there isn't access to major information that are structuring the public sphere.
Abdelhay, you have published, on this question of emotions and the ways in which social media have allowed the world and Moroccans to see the testimonies of other Moroccans. You have a very interesting article published last year with Tayyip Belkhazi on ihbat, what you call ihbat, the kind of sense of disillusionment after the Arab uprisings. What's your sense of the emotional kind of sentiments or the kind of feeling that you're getting at with this analysis in Morocco?
Well, we have realized that in social science and in political science in particular, emotions have been downplayed, where politics has been analyzed as the product of rational choice, rational reasoning, rational calculations. But actually, the emotions play an extremely important role in how people behave, how people think, how people understand or position themselves. And therefore, we looked at the Arab Spring in the case of Morocco, but we might even generalize it to other cases as well, as two moments. One is a euphoric moment where the young people went to the streets and started chanting slogans that actually were celebrating the free will of the people that are in face of authoritarian regimes. And all of a sudden there was some kind of a euphoric moment where people were celebrating that the change that they were waiting for and never happened. Some articles were talking about waiting for Godot in the Middle East and the Arab world, which doesn't come, referring to democracy that doesn't happen. So this was a euphoric moment, and then it was followed by a moment of disillusionment. And this moment of disillusionment was associated with the notion that those who were celebrating change, who were voicing the voice of the people, were actually not doing what would be politics. They were celebrating that the people are in power, but they were doing it on the streets. And when they were doing it on the streets, the major difference, which some would associate with the Moroccan exception, is that in the case of Morocco, the protests happened in many places, and they happened in peace with minimum level of repression. And I think that this was what has contributed in a smooth management of the political crisis, according to the state, that happened as a result of the Arab Spring. So the disillusionment was a moment when people realized that they are not going to move from one position to another, from one regime type to another, and then they have to learn from their what would be called the inability to produce change by protest only.
Now, question is how that emotions play into electoral politics. There was elections in October of 2016, and just last month in April of 2017, a new government was formed. Can you see some of the effects of this emotional shift in the new government that was elected and put together?
To a large extent, I think that we in Morocco, like probably other countries, or like democracies, we are realizing that the change doesn't happen. And I think that disillusionment that we were referring to in the case of Morocco could be generalized in the sense that the utopian change that we associate with elections doesn't happen. That as soon as you have no cabinet and no leaders, then what you were expecting to take place doesn't happen, and you try to manage or you try to live with your disillusionment. Similarly, in the case of Morocco, again, something that is also considered an exceptional condition in Morocco is that this is now the only Arab country that has elected an Islamist party and has lasted. In Egypt, it happened as a result of a revolution, likewise in Tunisia. But in both cases, the Islamists were ousted or marginalized, whereas in Morocco, they were elected in 2011 and then re-elected again in 2016, although their political power is to a large extent curtailed and limited by the omnipresence of the state and of the monarchy. So the disillusionment is again the feeling of the fact that elections don't produce the expected change. But I have the impression that rather than producing some kind of a radicalism, it also produces the acceptance of a situation, and maybe next generations might deal with their disillusionment in a different way.
Now I want to turn to talk a little bit about migration and the ways in which migration from sub-Saharan Africa through Morocco or to Morocco and to Europe, and also the Syrian refugees that one starts to notice, at least when I was in Morocco in December, you started to notice a real change as well in some of the urban centers are affecting Morocco. Morocco, of course, at the crossroads of many of continents and of bodies of water, where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic and where Africa meets Europe, has always been marked by the crossing of peoples. How can we think about the new pressures that are put on Morocco from these two migration patterns? I also want to ask about Morocco historically rejoining the African Union and whether that's related at all to one of these sets of migrations.
Well, the migration of the sub-Saharan Africans to Morocco has always existed, but with the closure and with the strict control over the borders to Europe, we are ending up having an increasingly large sub-Saharan population that is becoming a part of our daily lives. And of course, if you add the migration, the rising number of immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa and to a lesser extent from Syria, to the poor conditions, to the high level of unemployment, you can imagine the kind of the situation or the problems that generate. However, because of what you mentioned, Morocco's decision to rejoin the African Union, since it left it in sign of anger against the African countries who have recognized the Western Sahara, the Polisario, or the Rast even, as which Morocco considers to be a separatist movement and as an illegitimate entity. Morocco has decided to change its policy and to re-enter the African Union in order to find another way of defending what it considers to be the national interest and the integrity of the country. And because of that, there are a number of gestures by the Moroccans towards the African state in the form of investment, visits by the king for the first time to a number of non-French speaking African countries, and also by providing some job opportunities and the legalization of a number of sub-Saharan African immigrants in Morocco. For the Syrians, it is also, Morocco is the farthest Arab country from the Middle East. But in spite of that, we do have a number of Syrians coming, and there is also some attempt by Morocco to utilize the Syrian refugees in its competition with Algeria, who among the two countries is the most generous towards the Syrians. So while there is these issues of immigration and the problems associated with that, there is also the use of the immigration from Sub-Sahara or from the Middle East in order to, in the competition between Morocco and Algeria for the support and for the sympathy of either Sub-Saharan Africans or the Syrians and other Arab countries.
Driss, I want to, as a final kind of strand, start talking about the cultural scene, literary and cultural scene. Of course, you're a playwright and novelist, and we're featuring some of your own playwriting here at Northwestern and in Chicago. What are some of the trends within literary and cinematic and cultural scene within Morocco? Do you find a break or a continuity from the last decades within the new writing and filmmaking coming out of Morocco in the last decade?
Well, I think that actually it's in the cultural and artistic scene that we can see, in a certain sense, a will of change of aesthetics, expressing an ethical concern with the collectivity in a different way. A lot of work, for example, in cinema on the years of lead, but now which are the years of torture and repression in Morocco. Years of lead. Yeah, years of lead. And for example, you've got in cinema someone like Hisham Al-Asri, or you've got other people who are trying to find new aesthetic ways of telling their concerns about these questions. You've got the return of the question of the body and the expression of the body within the public sphere, and then it's going through theater, but also through festivals of dance and street theater that is there. You've got also the question of memory that is revisited in a different way in order to understand better where the reform started or not. And I think that's one other major question that is coming in the artistic and cultural scene is also the question of debates about how to live together, le vivre ensemble, this question of living together. You've got it in public debates of الفلسفة في الزنقة, this philosophy at the streets, young people discussing. You find it in people who are discussing on literature, on art. The only thing is that all these settings are still marginal because they are the will of actors, of civic actors, not enough venues, not enough ritualization of these questions within the public sphere, within the education system, within the mainstream media. So it shows that there is some dynamics coming from the will of actors, but not enough influence within the public sphere of these questions.
And finally, you hosted a conference in Rabat in the winter on Fatima Mernissi, the great scholar, feminist, sociologist, who is well known in the United States. You made the point that Mernissi's time we may want to reinvestigate her work. Could you say more about that, specifically around the question of feminism, gender studies, sexuality, and religion?
Yeah, I am with Mukhtar Al-Harras. We're both of us the coordinators of the chair of Fatima Mernissi, which is hosted by the Cezanne Hachem Research Center and the Faculty of Letters of the University of Mohammed V in Rabat. Our main interest in creating this chair is to go on discussing gender not only as such, but in relationship with democracy, which is a big question in Fatima Mernissi's heritage. I mean, she's not concerned only by patriarchy, but also by autocracy as something that is taking away the question of women's stake in public sphere and heritage. Second, our interest in question of youth and globalization and how youth, the voice of youth could be more heard. She's been working a lot on how to make this more clear. And also, we're taking further something that she started on underground market and social initiative. She's been working a lot on very rural or urban underground markets, because the fragility of society is something that is creating at the same time a very shaky, stable situation. So all these questions, we're taking them further by scholarships, by fellowships, and by research programs, and also by creating mixture between artistic projects and research projects.
That's great. Well, thank you for taking the time to show us and remind us just how dynamic the Moroccan social political scene is. It's something that is endlessly fascinating, important for American scholars, students, and citizens to know about. So thank you for taking the time to talk with MENA Dialogues today.